I said slowly. Unfortunately, that person died 5 years ago, and there was no trace of his body left. Shinchi lowered his head, and his hand not only didn't loosen, but he gripped the paper even tighter, causing it to slightly warp. He muttered, "So that's how it was." I misunderstood. "But since the general is willing to share this with me, there's something I need to say, though I'm not sure if I should." I spoke softly. "Go ahead." "There's no point in pursuing the pass." Shun-Chi spoke slowly, with great seriousness. "The general doesn't need to be saddened by someone who is dead." I interrupted him decisively. "I can't forget." His voice was hoarse, heavy through the mask. "You are the general and the princess. Your status is immeasurably high, with the world at your feet. The path ahead is long. There are thousands of good men in the world. You deserve the best. Inferiority always drags people along, making love a twisted path." We were so similar, both holding onto the last sliver of pride to keep moving forward. But ironically, the thing I couldn't forget was this. The bronze mask only revealed his pupils. The soldiers often joked about him. Even in my past life, I had jokingly asked what kind of appearance Shinchi had, speculating if he was ugly, and if that was why he wore a mask. But no. On the contrary, he was strikingly handsome, unrivaled in beauty. Xielon only had a fraction of his resemblance. I felt sorry for Xielon because of this. I had often wondered through Xielon's similar eyes. Would he, before he died, have looked at me with such pleading eyes, wondering if anyone would come to save him? Now I know the answer. He wouldn't. His feet could be crippled. His face could be branded with a thief's mark. He could be destitute and claim to be discarded, hiding his pride in silence, so I wouldn't find out. But he would never beg or act pitiful. His answer was a knife to the throat. It was an unhesitating thrust to the heart, a pride that could not be humiliated. So, I acted swiftly, snatching away his mask. I met his astonished eyes, watching him try to flee, covering his face in panic. I gripped him tightly. "By Zidu, I don't want the best. I only want you." I kissed him fiercely on the lips, a kiss that crossed 2 lifetimes, causing him to panic and instinctively push me away. "No." The son of a traitor, a man destined to die. How dare I dream such foolish dreams? In his struggle, his lips bled. He panicked and tried to escape. "I dare not, General. You should rest." I lowered my gaze and grabbed him again. "This is your tent. I will leave." Shun-Chi covered the cursed words near his eye and suddenly closed his eyes. He said, "I will leave. Sorry, Your Highness." I looked at his retreating figure and touched my lips, still tinged with blood. He called me Your Highness. But he called himself Chi, the discarded one. He had admitted his identity, but was too afraid to return to the past. Who still remembers the once brilliant young man from Bai family in Yuching? He was never really called Shin-Chi. Many years ago, in Yuching, his name was Bai Zidu. Zidu, return. This kiss, awkward, flustered, disorganized, and even smelling faintly of military sulfur and timber, took me back to that year in Yuching. It was our second kiss by my count. When I first met Bai Zidu, it was because someone reported to the authorities. At that time, the one in power was still my father, the late emperor. 2 scholars had different opinions about the increasingly unstable border regions, arguing fiercely. One held a wine bottle in his left hand, and the other a stool in his right. Both were recognized scholars, and the local magistrate did not dare to overstep, passing the responsibility around. In the end, it fell to me to lead a group and go investigate on behalf of the emperor. From a distance, I heard a group of scholars arguing, their faces flushed and necks red. Only Bai Zidu stood apart from them, like the moon surrounded by stars, expertly mediating and occasionally offering his opinions. After listening to one scholar's argument, he seemed thoughtful and said, "If the foundation is not solid, it will inevitably wither. Your advocate for peace has some merit. If the foundation is unstable, it will burden the people, waste resources, and cause widespread suffering. A ruler should indeed focus on stabilizing the people's livelihood and consider long-term plans." The scholar, who was praised, huffed indignantly. Baizidu, fanning himself with a folding fan, listened to another scholar's argument and then teasingly remarked, "Doubt without name, actions without results. Your advocate for war is also sound. Hesitating, letting things slip by, only fuels arrogance. The people of the Northern Ridge are brutal by nature. If this continues, and if we don't cut off the root cause, we will fall into a passive position, constantly under attack." The other scholar's face turned even redder. This group of pedantic scholars exchanged impassioned words, spitting as they spoke. I arrived just in time to hear Baizidu say, "In this world, the principles differ, and debates are endless. Each side has its reasoning. Therefore, I believe that actions speak louder than words." With that, he eagerly rolled up his sleeves, sat down confidently, and said, "If it's truly about defending the country, I'll be the first to go to the frontier and fight the Northern Ridge." "Brothers," he said, full of spirit, "who will join me?" In response, I gave a light laugh, and the entire room fell silent. I led my guards, dismissing the formalities, and found myself deeply intrigued by him. I smiled and said, "You certainly dare to speak boldly." Baizidu paused, then set down his crossed legs and humbly said, "I wouldn't dare. In this world, there are many principles, but one can only dare to speak of 8/10 of them." Arrogant yet humble, confident in his own abilities. I suddenly felt a spark of interest as I saw his serious expression, which stirred something inside me. In recent years, Yuching had become decadent and indulgent, where leisure and luxury dominated. Young scholars argued endlessly, their words sweet but shallow. There were fewer and fewer who spoke with true intent and talent. So I said, "I have been tasked with quelling the unrest, yet you, instead, have already persuaded me. As a token of thanks, how about joining me for a visit to the 8 Immortals Pavilion?" Baizidu studied me for a moment, his face reddening slightly as he said, "Since the princess invites, I shall humbly accept." That night, in the 8 Immortals Pavilion, we talked late into the night. Baizidu had a large influence, and many were eager to flatter him. What was rare was that, unlike his brothers who were often elevated too high, indulging in wine and women, he remained full of spirit and integrity. As we talked, I felt increasingly restless. As the first light of dawn broke, I spread out the map I always carried and placed it on the table, my fingertip pointing to the border regions. "You possess great knowledge. It's a pity that you waste it among these scholars who only know how to engage in empty debates about beauty and poetry. How about discussing the governance of the nation and military strategies instead?" Baizidu hesitated for a moment, then eagerly agreed. From then on, we became confidants. We often debated military tactics, each holding differing opinions. I told him his strategies were too rash, like a wild horse that couldn't be tamed. He said that I hesitated too much, like a turtle retreating into its shell. The more familiar we became, the more fiercely we clashed. The last time I saw him was the day before I was to leave for the border. The Northern Ridge had invaded again after 10 years, plundering, burning, and slaughtering the city, causing the heavens to be enraged and the people to suffer. My father could not bear the shame, and the court had no one else to turn to. I, fearing for the common people, volunteered to lead the troops to the frontier. The night before my departure, Baizidu and I drank ourselves into a stupor. Looking at his lips, which were spitting out sharp words, now smeared with wine, I found myself momentarily lost in thought. By some strange twist of fate, at that very moment, our eyes met, and clumsily, he kissed me. The rain had just stopped outside. The fresh scent of grass and trees mixed with a faint smell of mud. The mischievous young man in white, like a little fox who had stolen something, was full of energy. He said, "Your Highness, I apologize for my rudeness." The feelings I had suppressed surged uncontrollably. That kiss was youthful and awkward, but in retrospect it was so sweet. My heart raced as I turned and fled. I left behind everything he was about to say. He was from the Bai family. He couldn't go to the frontier. I, on the other hand, had no choice but to go, to protect the people. Years passed, and the world changed. The second year I was at the frontier, I heard that Baizidu had been accused of treason, and his entire family was executed by my royal brother. To this day, I don't know how Baizidu survived. Just as I didn't know what kind of suffering he had endured, his foot crippled, his face ruined, wandering through hardships, his body emaciated, his voice destroyed. A proud young man, once willing to speak the truth of the world, was ground down into the discarded man he had become. It was late at night. I pulled myself from my memories, still feeling the dull ache in my heart. I had so many regrets. The lover I never recognized, the unpunished rebels of the Northern Ridge, the naive hope I once had for my royal brother, the concern for the people I had failed to repay, and the nation that had never been just or fair. In this life, my fate is in my own hands. Baizidu was unwilling to remove his mask. He still avoided my gaze when facing me. I had plenty of patience, and I would wait for him to drop his guard with the rest of my life. But the pressing matter at hand was not between me and Baizidu. The battle for Yanlu Pass was imminent. Recently, the Bailu people had sounded their horn and were preparing for battle, with over 100,000 cavalry. Meanwhile, I only had 30,000 elite soldiers under my command. In the past, this battle had been one where the disparity in numbers was overwhelming and the reinforcements came too late. My soldiers had suffered tens of thousands of casualties, but we managed to hold the line with great difficulty. Dan had long since abandoned its martial ways, and my elder brother was suspicious and jealous, narrow-minded and unjust. The Yanlu Pass, which countless brothers had defended with their blood, was about to fall before I died in my past life. My face darkened as I sat at the main seat, discussing military tactics with a few deputy generals and Baizidu. After all the strategies were set, I suddenly asked Chong, who, "Have you been keeping an eye on Xiaolon? Has anything unusual come up?" Chong, who scratched his head. "No, General. Ever since you scolded him, that little pretty boy has been very well behaved." I glanced at Baizidu. He lowered his gaze. He seems somewhat resentful. He likes reading military books, but recently he's been going to the stable. When I asked him about it last time, he said he was just catching up with an old stableman. Chong, who scoffed. "Military strategist. Maybe you're overthinking it. He was a stableman himself, so it's normal for him to visit his old stableman brothers." Baizidu didn't respond, but nodded slightly. I narrowed my eyes, a sharp glint flashing. Xiaolon was all about face. He was desperate to shed his identity as a stableman, so why would he suddenly go back to the stables to catch up? I started formulating a plan and quietly instructed the staff to do as I said. I wanted to see what tricks he was playing. Or perhaps I could use him to hook a big fish. A murderous intent flashed in my eyes. With a great enemy before us, both he and my elder brother were rotten to the core, and they wouldn't lay a finger on my army. The next time I saw Xiaolon was before the battle at Yanlu Pass, when we were rallying the troops. The dark clouds pressed down on the city, and the gleam of armor shone like golden scales in the sunlight. Xiaolon followed behind Baizidu, looking much more haggard. I stood up, drinking a large cup of strong liquor. This battle concerns the pass. Although we are outnumbered, the men of Dian will never yield even an inch of our land. The Bailu have 100,000 troops. Are you afraid? Not afraid. Not afraid. Not afraid. The shout echoed from afar. I threw the wine bowl to the ground, shattering it, and with a loud laugh, I raised my spear. Good. Behind us is the homeland we protect. Today, whether life or death, I shall march with you. Chong, who looked at me in surprise, somewhat anxious. Before the army, he dared not show too much, but he bent down and whispered in my ear, "General, why go to the battlefield yourself? The rear needs you to command." I raised my eyes and smiled fearlessly. With Shun Junsher here, that's enough. Even if you discuss everything with him, he may not have the ability. Chong, who, direct in nature and always concerned for me, spoke without thinking, hoping that I would stay behind to ensure my safety in the rear. I felt a pang in my chest as memories of my past life resurfaced. The battle for Yanlu Pass had been a painful victory. General Qin, stationed at Yuching, arrived too late to provide reinforcements. The faces around me, weathered by hardship, had no idea how many had already been buried. Out of the 30,000 soldiers, only half remained. My gaze slowly fell on Xialan. Could his early intelligence and strategies have been part of a plot involving my elder brother and General Qin? With 30,000 against 100,000, it had always been an insurmountable gap, and everyone had prepared to sacrifice themselves. Loyalty to the country had been used as a bargaining chip for those seeking power. How disgusting, I said to Chong Hu. I am your general, your comrade. Not someone who hides behind, just preserving their own life as a ruler. It had always been this way for all these years. Chong Hu, with his head held high, slowly withdrew it. On the battlefield, the wind howled. I raised my arm and shouted, "How can there be no clothes?" Thousands of soldiers sang with me, "We share the same tunic." How can there be no clothes? We share the same water. How can there be no clothes? We share the same robes. How can there be no clothes? We share the same tunic. The king leads the army. We sharpen our spears and knives. Together, we share the same hatred. I calm myself and place the imperial seal in Baizidu's hands. Or perhaps, at this moment, I should call him Shinchi. I said solemnly, "You are not one who has been abandoned. Shinjunsher, the command of the troops is in your hands. Execute the plan we discussed. You can do it." Baizidu paused for a moment, then tightly gripped the seal. The force with which he held it almost drew blood. He spoke with solemnity, "I will not fail in my duty." There was no excitement in his eyes, no ambition like Xialan's to gain glory. There was only the determination to protect the lives of his comrades with everything he had. I took my spear, turned, and left the stage, leading the troops out. Just like in my previous life, the next morning, heavy fog descended, and the North Lufu troops launched a surprise attack. The war was about to erupt. The battlefield was no child's play, with the sound of real blades clashing, war drums echoing, and the horns sending chills down my spine. Yet amidst the chaos of battle, I found a genuine sense of living. This time, I was determined to protect my brothers. Outnumbered, our formation quickly crumbled under the onslaught. Arrows rained down like a torrential storm, flying recklessly through the fog. I struck my warhorse with the whip, narrowly avoiding an arrow aimed straight at my face, shouting hoarsely, "Hold on, just a little longer." Chong, who was injured, his shoulder sliced open, the wound extending to his chest, the flesh torn and bloodied, his face just as grotesque. He wiped his face and gritted his teeth, saying, "General, I can hold out for at least 2 incense sticks." Even if I had foresight, the enormous disparity in numbers between our 3,000 and their 10,000 could not be completely overcome. I had discussed plans with Baizidu for several days and nights, and we had come up with a strategy, but time was the only thing we lacked now. Another incense stick passed. The North Lufu troops brought forward their crossbows, advancing in tightly packed formations, pressing the attack. The narrow terrain of Yanlu Pass quickly became filled with soldiers, and we could see that a siege was forming, threatening to trap us. Xialan also entered the battlefield, leaping forward to sever another arrow aimed at me, his face filled with frustration and unwillingness. He was drenched in blood and asked me angrily, "General, are you satisfied? How many of our brothers have died for your selfish desires? If my strategy had been followed, at least we wouldn't have had our brothers die in vain." I looked up at the sky. The light of dawn was breaking. The fog was dissipating. I wiped the blood off my face and, with a fierce pull, removed the crossbow bolt lodged in my collarbone, blood spurting out. Without hesitation, I blew the whistle. The war drums quickly followed suit. The beat changed from slow to rapid. The defense transformed, suddenly shifting into an offensive posture. My loyal soldiers, who had followed me for years, were accustomed to my unpredictable actions. Their basic trust in me was that they would always follow the general's orders. Even if exhausted, They were willing to pick up their weapons and fight, slowly forming a small inner encirclement. Just as Xiaolon was confused, the outer circle of Yanlu Pass erupted with battle cries. The same dense rain of arrows shot down at the North Lufu soldiers outside the circle. Hundreds of elite archers, following Shun Qi's command, climbed the steep cliffs behind Yanlu Pass. As their line of sight improved, they released a barrage of arrows, relieving much of the pressure. The North Lufu's scattered formation hadn't yet regrouped when they heard Shun Qi's war drums again, signaling a new direction with a military flag. The soldiers, acting in perfect coordination, took their positions based on the flag's movement. 500 or 1,000 in groups, they quickly dispersed and arranged themselves. If I stood at a high vantage point right now, I would see the full situation and foresee a victory with minimal casualties. Looking down, the soldiers appeared like ants, but they formed an unbreakable defensive line, each line enclosing the North Lufu soldiers who had lost their formations. 64 encirclements, large and small, resembled a giant web woven by a centipede's many legs. The correct, aided by the unusual, and the unusual grounded in the correct. The two mutually generated and restrained each other. If stacked into a formation, they could cycle endlessly, without limit. This formation was often referred to as the Bagua formation. Bai Zidu and I had studied it for a long time. Combining this with the experience from my previous life, this was the most suitable strategy. But controlling the battlefield situation required precise mastery. Timing, terrain, and harmony, none could be missing. Taking advantage of the fog, we first exhausted some of the North Lufu's arrows and combat strength, then used elite archers for a surprise attack, breaking their formation and gradually decimating them. Without external reinforcements, using fewer soldiers to defeat more was the best way. The number of North Lufu soldiers in each encirclement rapidly decreased, while the central forces were unable to engage effectively, essentially becoming trapped. The situation flipped instantly, morale soared, and the battle cries reached the heavens. Wherever the military flag waved, the formation shifted repeatedly, with the soldiers moving mysteriously, leaving the North Lufu forces helpless and disoriented. By the time the North Lufu troops sounded their retreat, fleeing in disarray, their once mighty army had been reduced by half. When I counted the remaining soldiers, we had only 2,500 left. 5,000 against 50,000. This casualty ratio was nothing short of a miracle. The majority of those 5,000 brothers had died before the encirclements even formed. I poured a bowl of strong wine onto the ground. Among the scattered corpses, I spoke heavily. We won. With those 4 words, the once silent army finally erupted with release. Cheers rang through Yanlu Pass, and Bai Zidu, walking down from a high place, was surrounded by a group of jubilant, rough soldiers, who hoisted him up and cheered. Military strategist. Military strategist. Military strategist. I watched Bai Zidu, startled and overwhelmed by the attention, and smiled slightly. Then, turning, I raised my hand to silence the noise. The victory banquet will be held tonight. I looked at Xiaolon, pulled out a blood-stained letter from under my armor, and said calmly, "Now I have something to ask you." As they escorted Xiaolon back to the camp, the soldiers' cheers gradually quieted down. Although Chong, who didn't think highly of him, Xiaolon had still managed to win some favor in the army with small acts of kindness and buying people's loyalty. Originally, I had planned to train Xiaolon as a strategist. When the letter was produced, many of my personal soldiers couldn't accept it. They couldn't accept that a brother, who had once been close, had stabbed them in the back, trying to exchange their lives for his own achievements. This letter was intercepted before I began reviewing the soldiers. It was Xiaolon who had used his old connections with his former stableman brothers, and the message passed from General Qin. The emperor, my elder brother, favored literature over military matters, and the army was riddled with corruption. Among the army slaves who fed and cared for horses, 2 also kept pigeons. Xiaolon had been extremely clever. He used official seals on the pigeon messages wax, making it almost impossible to trace unless one was looking closely. I sat at the main seat in the training ground, with the army doctor carefully bandaging my wound. Chang Hu, whose injury was more severe and required more care, had gone to the tent. At this moment, White Zidu was by my side. He hesitated, saying, "Let me do it." I didn't get injured often, and if not for my clavicle wound, I could have bandaged myself, but the army doctor was particularly clumsy and didn't dare touch me too much. The doctor was clearly relieved. I couldn't see White Zidu's face under his mask, but I could tell his face was slightly flushed. His hands were steady though. I took a deep breath, ignoring the pain and itching from the wound on my collarbone. I coldly asked, "Xiaolon, do you know what you've done?" Xiaolon, with a haggard face, was forced to kneel on the ground. It seemed like he wanted to explain something, but when faced with a bloody letter, he couldn't say a word. This letter detailed his plans with General Qin and also my elder brother's intentions. I sneered, "You've delayed military plans, failed to send reinforcements, and were ready to hand over Yanlu Pass while supporting yourself as my brother's confidant, to take full control of these 30,000 soldiers and imprison me in the camp. Well calculated. But have you ever considered?" I tore the letter into pieces bit by bit. "Behind Yanlu Pass lies the land of the 9 states. You may not care about an inch of land, but how many common people live on that land? What is the point of serving in the military? It's to protect the home and country. We sleep with weapons by our sides, risking our lives to defend, and now our sacrifices have become mere pawns for peaceful enjoyment. What are we protecting?" I raised my hand, letting the pieces of paper fall like snow. The red and white mixed, like the blood and tears shed by soldiers at the border. I pointed at Xiaolon, but I had other intentions. I stood up, sweeping my sleeve, and the bandage on my wound was once again soaked in blood. Since the 32nd year of Yuching, I've personally led the troops to defend the northern border. After the late emperor agreed, it's been 6 years. In these 6 years, the military funds were exploited, the rations were nearly depleted, and the court became more corrupt while enjoying the peace bought by our blood. My brothers have died, and the casualties now number 75,402. What was once an army of 100,000 now remains only with you all, my brothers. Now I see this letter, and I suddenly realize the imperial star is flickering. The heavens are about to fall. Though I am a woman, my heart is for the people of the world. If you are willing, today, follow me. Let's rebel together, fight for our own cause, and fight for a reason to shed blood. If you are unwilling, go to the Wu grain and take your silver and go home. I will not stop you." I spoke with deep conviction, but once the words were out, I realized my hands were trembling violently. I remember it so clearly. The late emperor allocated 100,000 soldiers to me, and I led them to fight and die for 6 years. Among them, some died shielding me from blades, some died delivering messages, some died scouting the way. But none of them died because of betrayal. The spirits of the heroic dead, their iron wills, secured Yanlu Pass for 6 years, keeping the northern tribes out. But now, the numbers of our army are dwindling, while the northern troops keep growing.
Why?
Because the emperor ignores the people, and because the heavens are about to fall. I closed my eyes, prepared for whatever was coming. No matter how many people follow me, I will no longer be foolishly loyal. If the monarch is incompetent, why should I not take his place?
Kill, kill, kill.
The shouts shook the heavens, and every determined face was stained with blood. I opened my eyes, feeling a sharp sting in my eyes. I didn't let the tears fall. It wasn't us who should cry. It wasn't us who should bleed. I pointed at Xiaolon, and more so at the emperor behind him, and General Qin, who had betrayed the people. Traitors.
Kill.
No mercy. Xiaolon was sentenced to the most severe punishment, death by 1,000 cuts. That rule was one I had set myself. Without rules, there can be no order. On the very first day I arrived at the border camp 6 years ago, I had purged the local military power that had run rampant with impunity. The highest law I established was this: traitors must die by Ling Qi. Ironically, the long conversation I had with Zeta the night before I left Yuching had changed many of my views. For example, I had since become swift and ruthless in warfare. But later, Zeta took on the alias Xinqi and began acting cautious, hesitant, and overly considerate. I steadied my emotions and strode toward the military prison. A simple tent. Today, Xiaolon was to face his punishment. The stable hands who had helped him were each given 50 lashes with the army rod and expelled from camp. It was the harshest punishment issued in 6 years, so quite a crowd had gathered to watch. Most of the onlookers were those who hated him to the core, or brothers who once trusted him and were betrayed. In Xiaolan's letter, he had repeatedly referred to them as ignorant brutes. When I arrived, the crowd instinctively made way. I lifted the tent flap and stepped inside. The cramped tent smelled faintly of mold. Xiaolon lifted his eyelids to glance at me. He no longer begged for mercy. His eyes were dull, devoid of life. He merely laughed bitterly and said, "Victory crowns the king, defeat dooms the villain. General, I lost. There's nothing more to say." Chong, who fetched a chair for me. I sat down leisurely and began. "No, you didn't have to lose. Everything that's happened to you, you brought it on yourself." Xiaolon sneered. "Since you didn't value me, can I fight for a path of my own?" Chong, whose eyes bulged like bronze bells. "The general valued you greatly. You were just a stable hand, do you not know that? I valued you, and yet you never felt gratitude," I said coldly. "And let me tell you this, Xiaolon. I truly admired you once. You could have lived a very different life, one of high rank and power, remembered in history. You could have fulfilled your mother's dying wish, risen above your past, and stood tall among men." Xiaolon had once told me about his childhood. He was the son of an official, but his mother was a courtesan concubine, so he was scorned as a bastard. His father abandoned him, and his stepmother drove his ailing mother out, leading to her death. With nowhere else to go, he joined the army. But without household registration, held back by his stepmother, he had no choice but to become the lowest of the low, a stable slave. He only wanted to prove himself, to make his father acknowledge him. Because he came from nothing, he yearned for greatness. It was human nature. But personal suffering does not justify harming others. I continued, "But all those hopes you clung to, they're gone. Empty dreams. No one will remember you. No one will know you. You came into this world in obscurity, and now you'll leave it just as muddled. In the end, not a soul will even know whose son you were. Your father probably doesn't even remember he had a son like you." Enough. Xiaolon bit his dry lips until they bled. He struggled furiously against the bindings, desperate and furious. "Stop talking, but you did have some brains and ability. That's the saddest part. You came so close to the wealth and glory you dreamed of. You had the talent, but all for nothing. Stop it. Stop it."
Ah?
He tried to raise his hands and tear at his hair, but he couldn't. I let out a soft laugh. "Do you know why? Why my cruelty ran so deep? Why, even though it didn't look like he had committed some unpardonable sin, I still held nothing back." Xiaolon didn't understand. He could never understand. Just like I never truly experienced having my limbs hacked off by him in a past life, I still couldn't believe that someone with such drive to rise could be so completely devoid of gratitude. So I said, "Because you were rotten to the core. Talent is not the same as character. From beginning to end, it was never about whether I valued you or not. The Emperor, General Qin, none of them really mattered to you. The only thing you've ever cared about is yourself. You betrayed your sworn brothers without a second thought. You never once considered the nation or its people. You're not a hero brought low. You're a parasite that brings ruin wherever it goes. You wanted others to admire you, but deep down, you feared being looked down upon. But no one looked down on you. It was you who looked down on yourself. Some people, when they start to despise themselves, will retreat and lick their wounds in silence. Others, they'll try to drag everyone else into the abyss, and then convince themselves it was all inevitable. I remembered, right before my death in my past life, I heard Xiaolon say, Shen Yaoguang, you can't die. Don't you know how much I love you? Hang in there, the imperial physician is almost here. You can't die. I've worked so hard, so I could keep you by my side forever. He broke down crying, terrified I'd die just like that. But I only found it laughable. Someone who truly loves you wouldn't force you, wouldn't use love as an excuse to imprison you, wouldn't clip your wings just to keep you beneath them, drowning together in despair. His breakdown now was the exact same as how I looked before I died in my past life, which only proved his love, his affection, was just him lashing out after losing control. I leaned close to his ear, right before the execution began, and whispered one final sentence. This life, you'll die a stable hand, a traitor to the army, and in shame. That was his punishment. What is killing someone? Crushing the heart. That's the cruelest thing of all. A clean death would have been merciful. Now, with every slice of flesh, he'd remember. It didn't have to end like this. I lowered my eyes, turned, and walked away. Even being torn apart by 1,000 blades was not enough to repay the brothers who died in our past life because of him. But thankfully, the nightmare was over. And this life. There are still many roads waiting for me to walk. The news of Princess Chaoyang leading troops in rebellion spread swiftly across the 9 provinces. Some surrendered willingly. Others took the chance to fan the flames. The first to pledge allegiance was Shizhou, which had long been stationed behind the Yanlu Pass. In the very first month of my uprising, General Qin, who guarded Yuching, was beheaded by his own deputy. The deputy brought the severed head to me as a sign of loyalty. More and more people like him began to appear. But the one who left the deepest impression was still that deputy general. He was young, barely past 20, with delicate features, fair skin, and a cold, hard edge when he grew ruthless. I once asked him why he harbored such hatred toward the court. He gritted his teeth and smiled as he told me. He had only joined the army because his family's business was forcibly shut down. His sister, beautiful and graceful, was taken by General Qin against her will. With no other way out, he enlisted, waiting for the right moment to seize power. I fell silent for a long time after hearing that. He wasn't the only one like this. The army had taken their livelihoods, then forced them into its ranks. If the emperor would just open his eyes, he would see. Over these years, public resentment had boiled over, and the army was steeped in grievances. If such an army were truly roused, if I had failed to hold the Yanlu Pass, it would have ended in disaster. Countless lives lost, widespread betrayal. For common people under a heartless ruler, everyone bears their own sorrow. I had seen all shades of life, and only the red-tasseled spears under my command grew ever more resolute. Wherever their tips pointed, we conquered. As we marched in triumph all the way to the gates of Yuching, swift and unstoppable, Baizidu, who had refused to remove his mask the entire time, suddenly tore it off in front of everyone. Exposing his own wounds, Baizidu said to me, one word at a time. The one rebelling against the throne is Baizidu, the last surviving heir of the Bai family of Yuching, destroyed by the emperor 3 years ago. And Princess Chaoyang, General Shen Yaoguang, is a hero cleansing corruption from the emperor's side. All blame will be borne by me, Baizidu. Everyone was stunned, especially by the branded word, traitor, tattooed at the corner of his eye. Soldiers looked at each other in shock. Baizidu gave a strained smile and said, I have no right to serve as a strategist. Thank you all for taking care of me these past years. I have no words to repay you. I only hope I can pave the road ahead and carry the shame in your place. Chong, who was the first to react, he immediately shouted, Strategist, how many times have your plans saved us? How can you take the blame alone for a rebellion we all joined? General, say something. Chong, who was anxious because Baizidu had always been closest to me, not knowing the truth, of course they assumed I had given some secret order. I couldn't help but laugh. You finally dropped the name Xin-Chi? Then at last, I can call you Baizidu again. Chong, who was even more confused, pacing in a panic. General, you know each other? More than just know. The torchlight flickered across his face once more. For the first time in months of bloodshed, my expression softened. I said, By Zidu, open your eyes and look. No one here has ever thought of abandoning you. You are not someone to be discarded. Not to them, and especially not to me. Others may not have understood what I meant. But Bayezida did. He knew exactly what I was saying. I never despised him. I never forced him. Perhaps we really were the same kind of people. I made the same choice he once did. I was willing to wait quietly for him. But Bayezida had made one mistake. He never gave me the chance to choose. Still, he had once given his life. I figured I wouldn't hold it against him anymore. But in our past life, he had left me with so much pain that returned to me in countless midnight dreams. So maybe I could be selfish just once. Maybe I didn't need to give him the right to choose either. So the next moment, without warning, in front of everyone, I kissed him on the lips. Amid the gasps and whistles of rowdy soldiers and old scoundrels, I said, one word at a time, I will never abandon you. I will never abandon you. Just as you once refused to live on alone. Driving the emperor off his dragon throne wasn't as difficult as I'd imagined. Water can carry a boat, but it can also overturn it. That I could storm the palace and depose the emperor so easily, he played no small part in that himself. The palace guards were all bloated and incompetent, their skills laughable, like mantises trying to stop a chariot. When I charged into the hall of purple radiance, I had intended to speak calmly with my half-brother, the emperor. But the moment my blood-stained spear touched the hem of his sleeping robe, he trembled so hard that a stench filled the air. His face, worn from debauchery, and the terrified cries of the two beauties on his bed, all paired with his pathetic plea, "Don't kill me. I'll give you anything you want," made me lose any desire to speak further with him. If the people he'd oppressed saw him like this, they'd probably laugh themselves sick. He'd simply been born into the imperial family, cloaked in ancestral favor, and because of that, he could command wind and rain as he pleased, despite being utterly inept. So the world is unjust, and the heavens deserve to fall. Let the capable rise. I tied him up without ceremony and threw him into prison, ready to deliver this tyrant to the people for judgment. What followed was reform and reward. The borders were still eyed hungrily by foreign tribes. The road I had to walk was still long. When it came to Whitezida's future, I thought long and hard. In the end, I placed the marriage proposal Common Tiger had scribbled down with winks and nudges into a small box in the imperial study. My trusted generals teased me, but I didn't do as they said, didn't marry a male consort into the palace. After thoroughly cleansing the corrupt court, I looked at the still vacant seat of prime minister and, after careful deliberation, solemnly gave it to Whitezadu. He took off his mask, just like that night when he'd finally let go of the knot in his heart. But he still doubted himself sometimes. He raised a hand to cover the branded word thief at the corner of his eye and stood in silence for a long while. He said, "Thank you for your kindness, your majesty. But I'm the son of a criminal, and still." Whitezadu. I stopped him. Slow and clear, I said, "I don't want to hear that. And I don't intend to clip your wings or dull your claws. I'll stake the rest of my life on this. If one day you become like your father, corrupt and greedy, betraying the people's trust, I will be the one to personally behead you."
He stared at me for a long time.
He'd never been the type to hesitate or waver. I softened my tone. "And one more thing. I'm willing to wait for you, to come out, step by step. We have plenty of time." I don't know which words moved him, but his eyes turned red. Those peach blossom eyes, once lifeless, slowly lit up again. Just like the first time I met him years ago, wild and sharp, yet humble. He smiled, exhaled softly, as if expelling all the years of gloom, leaving only a light, almost playful. "All right." We exchanged a smile. The sky was starting to brighten. And there we were, tightly embraced, without knowing when it began. There were never many words between Whitezadu and me. I knew him. After years of hardship at the border, wandering in exile, I didn't know how much he'd suffered, only that I'd happened to be the one to save him. He lived off charity and repaid every favor. He wandered through military camps for years. And in my past life, before my death, he, a cripple, forced his way through the palace drenched in blood, just for one thing, to say, "You can kill me, but you cannot humiliate me." His face was branded, yet his pride never faded. I said, "White Sidhu, I'm here. You won't leave again, will you? Thanks to your highness's kindness, I will never leave again." There was no grand declaration of love. We never needed that between us. I believe that kiss we shared as youths in Yuching had already decided everything. We would grow old together. Awkwardly, quietly, and faithfully. Liking is what you say aloud. But love, it's restraint and staying. We held each other for a long time. So long that when dawn arrived, the first icicles of spring melted and the droplets fell steadily to the ground. It felt just like that spring in Yuching. Scattered wind and sudden rain, pear blossoms in full bloom on the trees. A young man in green robes snapped open his fan with a bright laugh, tipsy and charming. He licked the lips still tasting faintly of wine from a stolen kiss, stood up, and looked at my staggering back, calling out from afar with a teasing promise. "Your Highness, running won't help. You can bet I'll show up to join the fun. When the time comes, with your Highness charging ahead, I'll be right there behind, cheering for you at the front lines, cursing those northern brutes until they can't lift their heads." That joke led us astray through 2 lifetimes. 6 years, then 6 more. And now, with this promise for the rest of our lives, I think we'll walk together, day and night, never forgetting. Life came full circle, carving off our youth before returning it to us, whole again. The end.